Consciousness returned to me slowly, not like a sunrise, but like a drowning man breaking the surface of a swamp. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Stale wine, sweat, and the sickening sweetness of expensive perfume trying to mask the scent of failure. My head was pounding, a rhythmic thud against my skull that felt like a hammer hitting an anvil. I tried to open my eyes, but the morning light stabbing through the heavy velvet curtains felt like a physical assault. I tried to sit up, and immediately I knew something was wrong. This wasn't my body. My movements were heavy, sluggish. My joints creaked with a stiffness that shouldn't belong to me. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Pale, soft hands that had never known a day of hard labor. On the ring finger, a gold band sat tight against the skin, almost choking the circulation. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold, littered with empty glass bottles and discarded clothes. I stood up, and the room spun. I had to grab the bedpost to steady myself. My breathing was ragged, shallow. God, how much did this man drink? I stumbled toward the large vanity mirror in the corner of the room. I was afraid to look, but I had to know. I wiped the dust from the glass and stared at the stranger reflecting back at me. He was 30 years old, but he looked 50. His skin was sallow, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark, heavy circles. There was a softness to his jawline, a weakness in his chin covered by a patchy, neglected beard. Aric Valorian. The name floated to the surface of my mind, bringing with it a tidal wave of memories that didn't belong to me. I saw them flash before my eyes. I saw him, no, I saw me, begging for money from the estate steward. I saw myself being laughed at in the gambling halls of the capital. I felt the crushing weight of shame, the constant need to numb the pain with alcohol, the pathetic entitlement of a noble born with a silver spoon he didn't know how to hold. I gripped the edges of the vanity table until my knuckles turned white. Disgust, pure, cold disgust washed over me. I was trapped. I had been pulled from my world, from my life, and shoved into the decaying vessel of a man who had given up on himself a long time ago. I looked around the room. It was a monument to laziness. Gold-leafed furniture covered in dust, a wardrobe filled with silks and velvets that cost more than a peasant earns in a lifetime, all thrown on the floor. "No," I whispered. The voice was raspy, unused to speaking with conviction. I stripped off the silk nightgown, feeling the cold air bite at my skin. It felt good. It felt real. I walked to the wardrobe and ignored the bright, gaudy coats Aric loved so much. I pushed aside the reds and the purples. I found a simple black tunic and dark trousers at the back. Probably something he bought for a funeral and never wore again. As I buttoned the shirt, my hands were still shaking, but my mind was clearing. I looked at the mirror one last time. The bloat was still there, the weakness was still there, but the eyes were different now. The dull, glazed look of a drunkard was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating stare of a man who realized he had landed in hell and was already planning his escape. I am Aric Valorian now, but I will not be him for long.
I opened the heavy oak door of my bedroom and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was significantly colder than in the room, carrying a chill that seemed to seep right into the stone walls. The silence of the manor wasn't empty, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that falls when a predator enters a clearing. As I walked down the long gallery, my boots clicking against the marble floor, I saw them, the maids. 2 young women scrubbing the baseboards. Humans, just like everyone else in this xenophobic kingdom. As soon as they heard my footsteps, they froze. They didn't look up. They didn't smile. They stood up stiffly, pressed their backs against the wall, and lowered their heads in a rigid, terrified bow. I slowed my pace. In my old world, I would have said good morning. I would have asked how they were. But the memories of this body stopped me. Aric used to throw things at them if they moved too loudly. He used to yell if the floor wasn't dry enough. To them, I am not a lord. I am a natural disaster they are trying to survive. I felt a knot of shame tighten in my stomach. I wanted to apologize, but I knew words would mean nothing to them. Not yet. I reached the top of the grand staircase. Waiting for me at the bottom was a figure that looked more like a statue than a man. Sebastian, the head butler. He was a tall, gaunt man in his 60s, with gray hair slicked back and a spine that looked like it was made of steel. He had served my father, the general. Now he was stuck babysitting the general's disappointment. I descended the stairs, feeling his eyes judging every step I took. He was holding a silver tray. On it sat a small crystal glass filled with a brownish liquid. "The Baron is finally awake," Sebastian said. His voice was devoid of any warmth. It was flat, professional, and dripping with hidden disdain. "It is 2 in the afternoon. I have prepared your morning remedy." I stopped in front of him. I could smell it from here. Strong brandy mixed with raw egg and herbs. The hair of the dog. The old Aric needed this just to stop his hands from shaking. The smell hit me, and I almost gagged. In my previous life, I never touched alcohol. I hated the loss of control, the clouding of the mind. To wake up and be offered this poison was an insult to everything I stood for. I looked at the glass, then up into his cold eyes. I saw him bracing himself, expecting me to snatch the drink and demand more. "Take it away," I said softly. Sebastian blinked. It was a micro-expression, gone in an instant, but I saw it. "Sir, you usually require it to steady your nerves." I said, "Take it away, Sebastian." I repeated, my voice firmer this time, but calm. "I do not drink, not any more." I watched the confusion ripple across his face. He didn't move. I continued, "Bring me a pitcher of clear water and coffee, black, bitter. I need to wash the taste of this house out of my mouth." I didn't look back, but I could feel him staring at me. For 10 years, he had watched a drunkard destroy his family's legacy. Today, the drunkard refused the bottle. It wasn't enough to earn his respect, I knew that, but it was enough to make him question what he was seeing, and that was a start.
I entered the Baron's private study. It was a room that smelled of old paper and neglect. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the gloom. I walked over to the heavy mahogany desk, intending to sit, but something stopped me dead in my tracks. Above the fireplace, dominating the room, was a painting. It was a masterpiece, likely worth more than the entire contents of the manor. But it wasn't the technique that captivated me. It was the subject. Ilara. Even in oil and canvas, her presence was overwhelming. She had silver hair that cascaded like moonlight, and eyes of a deep, piercing violet, the mark of high-tier mana aptitude. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a cold beauty. The artist had captured the sadness behind her gaze, the posture of a woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. My wife. A fresh wave of memories hit me, sharper than before. I saw two old men standing on a muddy battlefield, hands clasped over a map, my grandfather and hers, a blood oath sworn in the heat of war. The Valorian and Everhart lines shall be one. They thought they were securing a legacy. Instead, they built a prison. Ilara didn't marry me for love. She didn't marry me for money. She has plenty of her own. She married me because she is a woman of honor. She respected her grandfather's dying wish. And how did the old Aric repay that loyalty? He drank her wine, spent her gold, and humiliated her name in every tavern in the city. I looked down at the desk. Sebastian had placed a letter there. It bore the wax seal of the Everhart family, a silver falcon. I broke the seal. My hands were steady now. The letter was brief, professional. A report from the northern frontier. She was currently negotiating a peace treaty with the Elven delegation. She was out there, in the cold, doing the work of the kingdom, while this body had been rotting in bed until noon. Returning in 2 months, the letter concluded. I slumped into the leather chair. 2 months. 60 days. I grabbed a quill and a blank sheet of parchment. My hand hovered over the paper. I wasn't writing a reply. I was drafting a plan. I looked up at her portrait again. I am not him, I whispered to the painted figure, and I won't let you be chained to a corpse any longer. The plan formed in my mind with crystal clarity. I didn't want her love. I didn't deserve it, and frankly, I didn't have the time to earn it. I wanted to go home. I wanted to return to Earth, where I was just an engineer, not a disgraced noble. But I couldn't just leave her with this mess. I dipped the quill in the ink. I wrote the header of the document in bold, sharp strokes. Asset liquidation and dissolution of marriage. I will fix this estate. I will gather every copper coin, every title deed, every secret this family owns. And when she returns, I will hand it all to her. I will give her the divorce she is too honorable to ask for. I will set her free. And then I will disappear into the unknown to find my own way home.
I pushed open the double doors to the library. The hinges groaned, a sound of protest from a room that hadn't seen a visitor in years. Dust motes danced in the air, thick as fog. To the old Aric, this place was a prison of boredom. To me, it was a cathedral. I lit the candelabras and began to work. I needed to understand the rules of this reality if I ever hoped to escape it. I spread the maps across the central oak table. This world is called Aethelgard. It is a brutal place, divided by race and blood. To the east, the elven forests, arrogant and closed off. To the north, the dwarven strongholds. And here, in the center, the human kingdoms, xenophobic, militaristic. I turned the page of a demographic treatise. My finger traced the illustrations of the demi-humans, people with the features of wolves, raccoons, and birds. In some independent cities, they are free merchants. But here, in the human lands, they are second-class citizens at best, slaves at worst. It explains why Garrett, the Wolfkin butler, looked at me with such guarded eyes. He expects cruelty because that is the law of this land. But politics wasn't my priority. Magic was. I found the Valorian family registry, a heavy leather-bound tome recording the magical aptitude of every ancestor for 500 years. I flipped to the last page. My name, Aric Valorian. Aptitude, mana null. I stared at the words. Mana null. 0. In a world where power is dictated by one's ability to bend the elements, I was born spiritually crippled. It explained everything. The disappointment of his father, the arranged marriage to Ilara, the prodigy, in hopes of breeding the weakness out of the bloodline. The old Aric drank to forget he was powerless. I slammed the book shut, sending a cloud of dust into the air. I don't have magic. I can't blast open a portal to Earth with a spell. I can't fly. I can't fight. I moved to the section on dimensional theory and ancient myths. I read until my eyes burned. I was looking for stories of others like me, other worldlers. There were vague references to the star travelers from 1,000 years ago, legends of rifts opening during the Great Conjunctions, but nothing concrete, no instructions, no map home. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. The library had given me knowledge, but it hadn't given me a solution. I was a man without magic, trapped in a hostile kingdom, with a ticking clock of 60 days before my wife returned to see her failure of a husband. I needed leverage. If I couldn't use magic, I needed something else. Something dangerous. I remembered a childhood story. Not Aric's memory, but a fragment of a whispered conversation I had found in the family journals earlier. My father wasn't just a general. He held a position in the shadows. I looked at the far wall of the library behind the geography section. There was no magic in me, but there was logic. And if this house was built by spies, then the answers wouldn't be in a book. They would be hidden behind the walls.
I returned to my father's private study, my heart pounding against my ribs, not from exertion, but from anticipation. I had found a reference in the family genealogy, a footnote that everyone else had ignored. My father wasn't just a general, he was the keeper of whispers. I stood before the massive oak bookshelf behind his desk. To the naked eye, it was just a collection of boring military histories. But to an engineer's eye, the wear patterns on the floor were wrong. The weight distribution was off. I reached for a thick black volume on the third shelf, The Principles of Siege Warfare. I didn't pull it. I pushed it in, then slid it to the right. Click. The sound was mechanical, heavy, and satisfying. It wasn't magic. It was gears in counterweights. A section of the bookshelf groaned and swung inward, revealing a stone staircase descending into darkness. A draft of cold, stale air hit my face, carrying the scent of ink and secrets. I took a candelabra from the desk and stepped into the abyss. The staircase wound down deep beneath the manor foundation. At the bottom, there was no gold, no piles of jewels. Instead, there were rows of iron filing cabinets and shelves stacked high with leather dossiers. I walked to the nearest shelf and pulled a file at random. It was marked with the seal of the high priest. I opened it. Inside were letters, dates, witnesses, proof of bribery, proof of corruption. I pulled another, the head of the Royal Academy, embezzlement of magical crystals. I realized then what this room was. This was my father's true legacy. Leverage. He held the leash of every powerful man in the kingdom. I closed the folder and my mind raced. I thought about Ilara. She is the most powerful mage of her generation. She is brilliant, fierce, and independent. She doesn't need me to protect her from her enemies. She would be insulted if I tried. She can crush them herself. No, these secrets aren't for her. My plan is clear. I will give Ilara the manor, the lands, and the remaining gold reserves. That will be the price of the divorce. She will accept because it is logical. It frees her from a deadweight. But this room, these secrets, these are for me. I am a mana null.
The royal libraries and the dimensional archives are forbidden to people like me. They would never let me research the star travelers or the portals back to Earth. But with these files, I don't need magic. I have something better. I have blackmail. I will trade my silence for knowledge. I will force the high mages to open their doors to me. I will force the king's scholars to show me the way home. I picked up the candelabra and turned back to the stairs, a new fire burning in my eyes. Ilara will get her freedom and her fortune, and I will get my ticket out of this world. The architect has arrived.
The morning sun hit the Valorian manor, revealing cracks in the stone that the shadows had hidden the night before. I sat in the dining hall, drinking black coffee, reviewing the ledgers. The situation was worse than I thought. The estate was bleeding money, but it was fixable. Mathematically, I could save it. My focus was shattered by the sound of heavy carriage wheels grinding against the gravel outside. Then came the shouting, the unmistakable sound of arrogant men imposing their will on those who cannot fight back. The double doors of the dining hall swung open. It wasn't an invasion. It was worse. It was a debt collector. Sebastian walked in. For the first time, the old butler didn't look stern. He looked defeated. He held a silver tray, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Sir," Sebastian said, his voice low as if he were announcing a death. "Viscount Garman is here. He has brought his personal guards. He says time is up." Garman. The name triggered a memory from the old Aric's brain, a fat, greasy noble who owned the gambling dens in the capital. He was one of the friends who had encouraged Aric to drink, to bet, to lose. He had lent Aric gold with a smile, knowing fully well he would come for the land when the money ran out. I walked to the window. In the courtyard, I saw him, Viscount Garman. He was stepping out of his carriage dressed in garish red velvet that strained against his stomach. He looked like a tick, bloated with the blood of others. He was shouting at a young maid, pointing his cane at the manor as if he already owned it. "He is demanding the deed to the estate, sir," Sebastian continued, avoiding my eyes. He says time is up." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. Not fear, rage. This man wasn't just here for money. He was here to strip the flesh off a carcass. If he takes the manor, I have nothing to offer Ilara for the divorce. My ticket home, my freedom, my survival, everything depends on this land. Sebastian looked at me, expecting the usual reaction. He expected me to cry, to beg him to hide me, or to run to the wine cellar. Instead, I finished my coffee. I set the cup down with a deliberate, sharp clink. "Sebastian," I said, my voice steady, "show the Viscount into the main drawing room. Offer him tea. Tell him the Baron will be with him shortly." Sebastian looked up, confused. "Sir, but do you have the gold?" I turned toward the library, a cold smile playing on my lips. "No, Sebastian, I don't have gold. I have something much more valuable." I left Sebastian trembling in the hallway and walked calmly toward the library. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, shutting out the noise of Garman's shouting in the courtyard. In here, the air was still. It smelled of old parchment and dust, the scent of pure, unfiltered knowledge. While the rest of the household was running around like headless chickens, terrified of a fat man in a velvet coat, I felt a strange sense of serenity. Panic is a reaction to the unknown, but I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Garman isn't a warrior. He is a parasite, and parasites always leave a trail. I approached the genealogy section. My fingers brushed against the spine of the black book. The Principles of Siege Warfare. It was ironic. Garmin was laying siege to my home with guards and debt collectors. I was about to break his siege with a single piece of paper. I pushed the book. The mechanism clicked, a smooth, precise sound of engineering that no magic could replicate. The shelf swung open, revealing the cold, stone staircase descending into the dark. My father's legacy, the Archive of Whispers. I descended the stairs, grabbing a lantern on the way. The shadows danced on the walls, but they didn't frighten me. This was my domain now. At the bottom, the room stretched out, lined with thousands of dossiers. To an outsider, this looked like a boring clerk's office. To me, it was an armory. Every folder was a dagger. Every scroll was a sword pointed at the throat of a powerful man. I walked to the section marked Noble Houses, Merchant Class. Garmin wasn't old nobility. He was nouveau riche. He bought his title with gold earned from gambling dens and exploitation. Men like him always make the same mistake. They think gold can buy silence. They are wrong. Gold only rents silence, and eventually the lease expires. I flipped through the G section. Galton, Guard, Garmin. I pulled the thick leather folder from the shelf. It was heavy. Garmin had been busy. I carried it to the reading table and lit a second candle. I didn't need to read his entire life story. I just needed one thing, one fatal mistake, a kill shot. I skipped the pages about his gambling debts and his mistresses. Those were scandals, yes, but they wouldn't stop him from seizing my land. Shame doesn't stop a man like Garmin. Only prison or death does. Then I found it. A series of financial transfers dated 3 years ago. I traced the numbers with my finger, doing the mental math instantly. Garmin had been appointed as the treasurer for the St. Alara Orphanage Fund, a charity run by the High Church. According to the public records, he had built a new wing for the orphans. But according to my father's spies, the construction company that received the gold was a shell company registered to Garmin's own wife. He didn't build a wing for orphans. He built a summer villa for himself. A cold smile spread across my face. Stealing from the crown is a crime, but stealing from the church, in this kingdom, that is heresy. It is a one-way ticket to the executioner's block. The high priest would have Garmin's head on a spike before sunset if he knew. Garmin came here today thinking he was the hunter. He thought he was cornering a weak, alcoholic prey. He has no idea that he just walked into the den of a monster. I took the incriminating document, a copy of the bank transfer with his signature, and folded it neatly. I didn't need a sword. I didn't need a fireball. I placed the paper inside a crisp white envelope. I stood up and smoothed out my coat. The envelope felt light in my hand, but I knew its weight. It was the weight of a man's life. It was time to go back upstairs. It was time to show the Viscount that the trash baron was dead, and the architect had taken his place. I entered the main drawing room. The air smelled of grease and expensive perfume. Viscount Garmin had made himself comfortable. He was sprawled on my grandfather's velvet sofa, his muddy boots resting on the coffee table. He was eating a tray of pastries that Sebastian had been forced to serve him, crumbs falling onto his red tunic. When he saw me, he didn't stand up. He didn't bow. He just laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. "Well, well," Garmin sneered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "The trash baron finally crawls out of his hole. I was betting with my guards that you were already halfway to the border." He picked up a document from the table and waved it in the air. "The deed to the land, Valorian. Sign it, or I take the house, the horses, and your servants. I hear the mines are looking for cheap labor." Sebastian stood in the corner, his face pale, waiting for me to beg. I walked calmly to the chair opposite Garmin and sat down. I crossed my legs and smoothed the fabric of my trousers. I didn't look at the deed. I looked him straight in the eyes. "Viscount," I said, my voice conversational, as if we were discussing the weather, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding my debt." Garmin's face turned red. "Misunderstanding? You owe me 50,000 gold coins. There is no misunderstanding, you drunk fool." I reached into my jacket pocket. Garmin flinched, perhaps thinking I had a knife, but I only pulled out a simple white envelope. I placed it gently on the table, between us. "I am not talking about my debt, Garmin," I said softly. "I am talking about yours." He frowned, confused. "What are you babbling about?" "The St. Alara Orphanage Fund," I whispered. The room went dead silent. The color drained from Garmin's face as fast as if he had been slapped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. 3 years ago," I continued, leaning forward slightly, "you were entrusted with the holy funds to build a new dormitory for the children. But you didn't build it, did you? You built that beautiful summer villa on the coast instead, using a shell company registered to your wife." Garmin began to tremble, not with anger this time, but with pure, primal fear. Stealing from the crown gets you prison. Stealing from the church in this kingdom gets you a public execution. "I have the bank transfer records inside this envelope." I tapped the white paper with my finger. "And I have a letter already written to the high priest. If this envelope leaves this room, your head will be on a spike before dinner." Garmin stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Sweat began to pour down his forehead, ruining his makeup. The arrogance was gone. The predator had become the prey. What do you want?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "First," I said, "you will sign a document stating that the Valorian debt is paid in full, including interest." He nodded frantically. "Done. Yes, done." "Second," I added, standing up, "you broke my door, you muddied my floor, and you frightened my staff. I think a donation of 10,000 gold coins to the Valorian estate would be appropriate for the distress caused. Don't you agree?" It was extortion, pure and simple, and he had no choice. Garmin signed the papers with a shaking hand. He threw a bag of gold on the table, money he likely had on him to bribe someone else, and ran. He actually ran out of the room, shouting for his carriage, desperate to escape the monster he thought was a fool. I watched through the window as his carriage tore away, dust rising in the air. I turned to Sebastian. The old butler was staring at me. He looked at the cancelled debt on the table, then at the bag of gold, and then at me. Slowly, deliberately, Sebastian bowed. It wasn't the stiff bow of a servant doing his job. It was a deep bow, a bow of respect. "What are your orders, my lord?" he asked. "Clean this room, Sebastian," I said, walking towards the door, "and pay the staff. We have work to do."